Halloween night is always one of those times when anything can happen. It's part of the fun. You see kids running around in costumes, laughing as they collect candy, and sometimes older teens like us try to sneak a little mischief into the night. But what happened to me last Halloween was something I can't shake off. It wasn't just some spooky Halloween scare. It was something far worse. It started pretty normal. My friends and I weren't into trick-or-treating anymore, so we had other plans: hit up a few houses for candy, hang out, and maybe go to a Halloween party. I was dressed as Jason Voorhees with the machete, fake blood, the whole deal, while my two friends, Carl and Jack, were going as Ghostface and a werewolf. Typical last-minute costumes, but we didn't care. It was all about having a good time. We were about halfway through our night when we split up. Carl and Jack wanted to go check out this haunted house attraction at the edge of town, but I wasn't really feeling it. The whole jump scare thing isn't my idea of fun, so I told them I'd catch up later. We agreed to meet back at the park after an hour or so. It was around 10 p.m., and most of the trick-or-treaters were starting to head home. The streets were clearing out, and the excitement of the night was dying down. I was walking alone, taking the long way around the neighborhood, when I heard someone calling out behind me, "Hey kid." I turned around and saw a man in a police uniform. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just checking to make sure everyone was following the rules, keeping an eye on things. But as he got closer, something felt off. He didn't look like the other cops I'd seen around town. His uniform looked kind of old, worn out, like it hadn't been replaced in years, and there was no police car nearby, just him, walking alone on the sidewalk. The brim of his cap hid part of his face, but what I could see of his expression was serious. Too serious for someone just patrolling a neighborhood full of kids having fun. "There's a curfew," he said, his voice firm but calm. "You need to head home." I was confused. I hadn't heard anything about a curfew. I figured maybe it was something new for Halloween, but none of my friends mentioned it either, and I had seen plenty of other kids out just minutes before. "Curfew?" I asked. "I didn't hear about that." The man took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "It's been enforced since earlier tonight. No one's supposed to be out after 10 p.m. Now, I don't usually question authority, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. There was no urgency in his voice, just this weird, cold insistence. He didn't look at me like a cop who was concerned for my safety. He looked at me like I was breaking some unspoken rule. "I'm heading back now," I said, trying to play it cool. "I'm meeting my friends at the park." The man didn't budge. "I'll walk you. Make sure you get home safely." That's when the alarm bells started ringing in my head. It wasn't that far to the park, and I didn't need anyone to walk me there. Plus, why would a cop bother with something like that when there were still plenty of kids out and about? None of it added up. "No, it's fine," I said, taking a step back. "I'm good. My mom's picking me up at the park in a few minutes." I wasn't planning on calling my mom. I was 17 and more than capable of walking around the neighborhood on my own, but something about this guy just didn't feel right, and I wanted him to know I wasn't alone. Maybe that would make him back off. He paused for a moment, looking me over like he was deciding whether or not to believe me. His eyes were cold, calculating, like he was sizing me up. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he finally said. "It's dangerous." His words sent a shiver through me, but not the kind you get from a good scare. It was more like a warning, like he was telling me I was in danger, but not from anything else out there. From him. "Yeah, well, I'll be fine," I muttered, already reaching into my pocket for my phone. "Thanks, though." I could feel his eyes on me as I pulled out my phone and pretended to dial my mom's number. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart starting to beat a little faster as I tried to stay calm. "Hey, Mom." "Yeah, I'm at the park. Can you come get me?" I kept talking, hoping the guy would get the hint, but instead, he took another step toward me. "You know, I can take you home," he said, his voice lowering. "It's not safe out here, and you don't want to get in trouble for breaking curfew." I started backing up, my phone still pressed to my ear, but my fake conversation wasn't fooling him. His expression shifted slightly, just enough for me to see the tension behind his eyes. He wasn't trying to help. He was trying to corner me. That's when I made my move. "I'm just going to wait for my mom at the park," I said quickly. turning on my heel and heading down the sidewalk. I didn't bother looking back to see if he was following. All I knew was that I needed to get to the park, somewhere public, where there would be people around. As I walked, I kept looking at my phone, pretending to be deep in conversation. But I couldn't help sneaking a few glances behind me. The man was still there, just far enough back to be out of earshot, but close enough that I could feel his presence, like a shadow creeping along behind me. I picked up the pace, my mind racing with a dozen different thoughts. Was this guy really a cop? Or was he just some creep pretending to be one? Either way, I knew one thing. I couldn't let him follow me all the way to the park. That's when I saw it. Carl's mom's car parked up ahead. She was dropping off Carl and Jack after the haunted house. I jogged toward the car, waving them down. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound casual, but probably looking a little more frantic than I intended. Carl and Jack got out of the car, laughing and talking about how great the haunted house was. When they saw me, though, their smiles faded. "Dude, what's up?" Carl asked. "Some guy's been following me," I whispered, looking over my shoulder. "He says he's a cop, but I don't think he's legit." Carl's mom must have noticed the look on my face because she rolled down the window. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "But there's this guy. He says there's a curfew and I should go home, but something's not right." She didn't hesitate. "Get in the car." I didn't argue. I climbed into the back seat, and Carl and Jack slid in next to me. As soon as the door shut, Carl's mom drove off, leaving the man standing alone at the end of the block. I watched him through the rearview mirror, hoping that would be the last I'd ever see of him. But the story didn't end there. When we got back to my house, I told my mom what had happened. She was furious, especially when she realized this guy had been following me for blocks. She called the police to report it, and that's when things got even weirder. The local precinct said they didn't have any officers patrolling that area. No one had been assigned to enforce a curfew because there wasn't one. Whoever that man was, he wasn't a cop. He was pretending. And I had no idea what he had planned. For days after that, I couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, the way they seemed so empty yet so focused on me. I kept wondering what would have happened if I hadn't pretended to call my mom, if I hadn't run into Carl and Jack, if I had let that man take me home. I still walk around my neighborhood sometimes, but I'm a lot more careful now. Halloween's coming up again, and I can't help but think about that night. There are some monsters you expect to see on Halloween, ghouls, vampires, ghosts, but sometimes the scariest ones are the people who wear normal faces, pretending to be something they're not. Because whoever that man was, he's still out there, and he's probably still wearing that uniform, looking for someone else to fool. This year, I'm definitely not heading out there alone. I was pretty thrilled when my parents informed me they'd be attending a Halloween party this year. Not because I wanted them out of the house, but because it meant I'd have the place to myself for the night. At 16, I figured I could manage just fine. Plus, it gave me the perfect opportunity to indulge in horror movies, hand out candy to trick-or-treaters, and not have anyone reminding me about my bedtime. The evening started off like any other Halloween. I ordered a pizza, stacked up my favorite horror films, and kept a bowl of candy ready by the front door for the kids. There was something unsettling about the atmosphere that night. The cold air, combined with a light drizzle tapping against the windows, gave the night an eerie edge, like something ominous was just waiting to unfold. By 7 p.m., the first wave of trick-or-treaters showed up. Little kids dressed as superheroes, witches, and monsters. I handed out candy, complimented their costumes, and returned to my movie. Every so often, the doorbell would ring again, and I'd pause the film to greet more kids and hand out candy. This routine continued for about an hour. Then, around 8:30, the doorbell rang again. When I opened the door, there was just one trick-or-treater standing there. I couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl, but they seemed a bit too old for the whole trick-or-treating thing. They wore a cheap, dirty mask that resembled a knockoff Michael Myers, though something about it was off in a way I couldn't quite place. "Happy Halloween," I said, trying to keep things light. The person didn't respond, They weren't holding out a candy bag or anything, just standing there, staring at me through the mask. After an awkward pause, I grabbed a handful of candy and dropped it into their hand. "There you go, dude. Have a good night," I said, hoping to move things along. The figure tilted their head, almost like they were confused, or maybe disappointed. After a few more seconds, they turned and walked down the steps, disappearing into the shadows of the street. Weird, but I shrugged it off. People can act strange on Halloween. I closed and locked the door, feeling slightly unsettled but dismissing it as just another odd encounter. About half an hour later, I heard something. It wasn't the TV or the rain, it was something else. A faint thumping sound, like it was coming from upstairs. I muted the movie and listened, but the house had fallen silent again. Maybe it was just settling noises, I thought. A few minutes later, the sound came back, only louder this time. It wasn't just one thump either. It was a series of creaks, like someone was walking. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to lock the back door. Earlier, I had stepped outside to bring in some Halloween decorations, and maybe I had forgotten to secure it properly. I tried to brush it off. It's probably just the wind, I told myself. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I got up and walked to the kitchen, where the back door was. The kitchen lights were off, and as I approached, I saw that the back door was slightly open. My stomach sank. I was certain I had locked it, or at least I thought I had. As I reached to close the door, I heard a noise. A soft rustling coming from the direction of the stairs. My heart started pounding. There was no doubt now, someone was in the house. My mind raced. Could my parents have come home early? Could it be a neighbor? But none of that made sense. No one would just walk in through the back door. I took a step back from the kitchen, my eyes darting toward the stairs. That's when I saw him. The same figure from earlier, the one in the mask, was halfway up the staircase. He stood there, completely still, like he was waiting for me to notice him. My heart jumped into my throat. This wasn't just some harmless trick-or-treater anymore. This person had let themselves into my house. For what reason, I had no idea. We locked eyes, though I couldn't see anything behind the mask. He didn't move. One foot was on the stair, the other off, as if he'd been caught in the middle of sneaking around. I tried to think fast, my pulse racing. My phone was upstairs in my room, but there was no way I could get past him without a confrontation. I took a step backward, and he took a step forward. "Hey," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What do you think you're doing?" No response. He just took another step closer. Panic surged through me, and I bolted up the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time. I didn't dare look back. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, but I managed to reach my room, slam the door shut, and lock it. Leaning against the door, I tried to catch my breath. Everything was quiet again. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. I grabbed my phone off the desk and frantically called my mom. "Mom," I whispered, my voice shaky. "There's someone in the house." What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I gave candy to some guy earlier, and now he's inside," I explained, my heart racing. "Call the police right now. Lock yourself in your room. We're coming home." I hung up and immediately dialed 911. As I explained the situation to the dispatcher, I heard it again. Footsteps, but slower this time. Cautious. The masked figure was moving down the hallway right outside my door. The dispatcher stayed on the line, but all my attention was focused on those footsteps. They grew closer with each creak of the floorboards. Then, just like that, they stopped. I held my breath, terrified. Was he standing right outside my door? Was he about to try and break in? I crouched down, trying to stay as quiet as possible, though my heart was pounding so loudly I feared he could hear it. Seconds ticked by. 10 minutes. I stayed frozen, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Finally, I heard sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me. The dispatcher told me to stay put until the police arrived and cleared the house. Those next few minutes felt like an eternity. I didn't hear the footsteps anymore, but that didn't bring much comfort. For all I knew, the masked guy could have been hiding somewhere, waiting for the cops to leave. When I finally heard the police knocking on the front door, I bolted downstairs to let them in. They searched the house, but the intruder was gone. They found the back door wide open, just as I had left it, and a few scuff marks on the stairs, but nothing more. The officers reassured me that I had done the right thing by locking myself in and calling for help. But it didn't feel like much of a victory. The masked guy had been inside my house, so close, and I still had no idea what he wanted. My parents came home soon after, worried but relieved that I was okay. They asked me question after question, but I didn't have any real answers. I couldn't explain why the guy had come back or why he'd picked our house. Even though the police promised to patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that he might come back. That night, I locked every door and window, double-checking them before finally going to bed. Halloween is supposed to be a night for fun and harmless scares, but this year, the scare had been all too real. And the worst part? I still didn't know what he wanted. I hadn't planned on attending the Halloween party that night. I told my friends repeatedly that I wasn't in the mood, but they were relentless, and eventually, they wore me down. With just over an hour left before the party started, I rummaged through my closet and grabbed the only thing that could pass as a costume: a black hoodie, some face paint to make me look like a skeleton, and an old pair of gloves I had cut the fingers out of. Not my best effort, but it would do. It was a house party at Lucas's place, located on the outskirts of town. His family owned a sprawling estate with more rooms than anyone could possibly need, and their Halloween parties were legendary. I'd attended a few in the past, and they always spiraled out of control. My best friend, Danny, picked me up around 8, and we headed over. The streets were already filled with kids trick-or-treating, and I found myself watching them through the car window. Their costumes and laughter felt innocent, just like Halloween should be. Meanwhile, I was heading to a party where I knew people would get too drunk to care about anything remotely fun. Lucas's house was decked out with fake spider webs draping the front yard, skeletons hanging from the trees, and jack-o'-lanterns glowing on every step leading to the front door. The loud music hit us as soon as we stepped out of the car, and I could already see a few partygoers stumbling around, red Solo cups in hand. "Looks like the party's in full swing," Danny said with a grin. I simply nodded, not really feeling it, but trying not to be a buzzkill. We made our way inside, and the place was packed with people in half-hearted costumes, the music blaring, and a few partygoers already passed out on the couches. The air reeked of cheap beer and sweat, and the bass from the speakers was so loud, it felt like it was shaking the walls. We wandered around for a while, catching up with acquaintances. I wasn't drinking much, just nursing a beer and trying to summon some energy to enjoy myself, but something was bothering me, a nagging sensation that someone was watching me. Not in the casual way you'd feel at a crowded party, but more like a specific, intense gaze. At first, I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just the chaotic energy of the party, or perhaps I was being paranoid. But every time I moved through the house or glanced over my shoulder, I spotted someone in the crowd, a tall figure wearing an old-fashioned suit and a full-face mask. It was one of those vintage, creepy masks you see in black-and-white horror movies, resembling a cross between a clown and a mime, complete with a frozen grin and hollow eyes. Initially, I thought it was just someone trying to have fun, but no matter where I went, I kept seeing him. At the end of the hallway, in the kitchen, outside by the pool, always just standing there, never interacting with anyone. Simply observing. "Hey, you good?" Danny asked when he noticed I had gone quiet. "Yeah, I guess," I muttered, still scanning the crowd for that guy. Danny raised an eyebrow. "You don't look like you're having a great time. Want to head out?" I shook my head. "Nah, I'm fine. Just thought I saw something weird, that's all." "Weird? It's Halloween, man. You're supposed to see weird stuff," Danny joked, giving me a light punch on the arm. I smiled, trying to act like I was overreacting, but something still felt off. As the night dragged on, I attempted to lose myself in the noise and the crowd, anything to distract me from that unsettling feeling, but it didn't work. Every time I caught a glimpse of that masked figure, a jolt of fear surged through me. I'd turn away for a second, and when I looked back, he'd be gone. It wasn't until later in the night, when the party started to wind down, that things took a turn. Danny had disappeared somewhere, probably with some girl, and I found myself sitting on the back porch, needing some air. It was quieter out there, just the muffled sound of music drifting from inside the house, and the cool night breeze felt refreshing against the heat of the party. That's when I saw him again, the figure in the mask, standing near the trees at the edge of the property, barely visible in the shadows. I stood up, my heart racing. I couldn't explain it, but there was something about him that felt wrong, as if he wasn't just another guy in costume. I walked back inside, scanning the room for Danny or anyone I knew, but the house was starting to empty out. The music had quieted down, and I realized it was much later than I thought. Deciding I'd had enough, I pulled out my phone to text Danny, but I couldn't get a signal. As I made my way through the house, I noticed more and more people had left. It was as if the party had dissipated, leaving behind only a handful of stragglers. I headed down a dimly lit hallway, looking for the bathroom before I left. The music was barely audible now, and the silence weighed heavily. I reached the end of the hallway and pushed open the bathroom door, only to find it empty. As I stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. My reflection, and just behind me, standing in the hallway, was the masked man. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My stomach dropped, and a wave of unease washed over me. This wasn't funny anymore. Whoever this guy was, he was taking the whole creepy act way too far. I rushed back down the hallway, ready to grab Danny and get the hell out of there. But as I turned the corner, I froze. In the middle of the room stood the masked man. He was motionless, saying nothing, just blocking my path. I could hear the faint sound of music from the other room, but everything else was silent and no one else was around. For a moment, I hesitated, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. This had to be a prank, some Halloween joke, but the way he stood there, his head tilted slightly as if he were studying me, didn't feel like a prank at all. "Hey man, you win, okay? You got me. I'm freaked out, can you just move?" The masked man didn't respond, he didn't even flinch, just stood there, blocking my exit. I took a step back, and that's when he moved, slowly. He took a step forward, then another. His movements were unnaturally smooth, almost like he was gliding toward me. "Okay, seriously, dude, this isn't funny," I said, my voice trembling. I backed up further, but he kept coming, one slow step after another, closing the distance between us. Without thinking, I turned and bolted down the hall, racing back toward the main room. I kept running until I burst through the back door, stumbling onto the porch. I looked around, but no one was there. The yard was empty, and the house felt eerily quiet. For a moment, I wondered if I was losing it. Maybe I had too much to drink, or maybe the party had gotten to me. But then I heard the door creak open behind me, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. The masked man was following me. I didn't think. I just ran across the yard and into the trees, my legs pumping as fast as they could go. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps unnervingly steady, like he wasn't even trying to run, just keeping pace. I darted through the trees, branches scraping against my skin, with no idea where I was going. Just away from him. I burst out onto the road, my chest heaving, and glanced back over my shoulder. The masked man had stopped at the edge of the trees. He didn't follow me onto the road, just stood there with his head tilted to the side. I kept running until I reached the end of the road, where Danny was leaning against his car, talking to a girl I didn't recognize. I skidded to a stop, grabbing the side of the car for balance. Danny looked up confused, his conversation cut short by the sight of me practically collapsing next to him. "Dude, what the hell?" he asked. "There's someone up there," I managed to choke out, pointing back up the road toward the house. "A guy in a mask. He was just watching me." Danny pushed off the car and took a step closer. "You serious?" he asked, his tone shifting from casual to concerned. "Dead serious. He was just standing there in the dark. I don't know what his deal is, but it's not good." Danny glanced up the road. "All right, let's go check it out," he said, grabbing a flashlight from the back seat. "What? You're not seriously going back up there?" the girl protested, clearly unnerved by what I just said. Danny shot her a reassuring grin. "We'll be fine. It's probably just some idiot messing around. We'll scare him off." I hesitated, my pulse still racing, but the thought of confronting the guy with Danny by my side made me feel a bit braver. "All right, but if things get weird, we're getting out of there." Danny agreed, and we began walking back toward the house. The air felt colder now, and as we approached the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced around, half expecting to see the masked man reappear, but nothing stirred. When we reached the edge of the property, we scanned the area, but the house stood silent. "See? Nothing to worry about," Danny said, but I wasn't convinced. As we stepped onto the porch, the door creaked open again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The house was dark inside, but the faint sound of music drifted through the air, mixed with the sound of laughter. "Maybe everyone just went inside," I suggested, hoping to dispel the unease settling over me. Danny nodded and pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The music grew louder, but the atmosphere was different now, tense, almost expectant. The party had thinned out, and what remained were a few scattered groups of people, but the vibe had changed. We walked through the house, searching for the masked man, but no one seemed to be paying attention to us. It was as if everyone was in on some secret that we weren't. "Maybe he left," Danny said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, maybe," I replied, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I suggested we check the back room, where we might find more people, but as we approached, I felt that sense of unease wash over me again. When we stepped into the room, we were met with silence. The music had cut off, and the few people still in the room turned to look at us, their expressions blank. At the far end, in the shadows, was the masked man, standing alone. The air thickened with an unshakable tension as he slowly turned to face us. I felt a wave of panic rise within me. "Danny, we need to go," I whispered urgently, but it was too late. The masked man took a step forward, and the people in the room moved aside, parting like a wave to make way for him. They didn't speak, didn't react, they just watched, their eyes vacant. "Danny," I urged, grabbing his arm, but he stood frozen, staring at the man. "What is he doing?" he asked, confused. Before I could respond, the masked man lifted a hand, pointing directly at me. I felt my heart stop. There was something about that gesture, something primal and terrifying. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. The partygoers erupted into laughter, but it wasn't the playful laughter of a party. It was something darker, something mocking. My stomach twisted in knots as I tried to comprehend what was happening. "Let's get out of here, Danny," I shouted, pulling him toward the door. As we ran, I could feel their eyes on us, the weight of their laughter echoing in my ears. We burst through the door, back into the cool night air, desperate to escape the suffocating darkness of the house. We made it to Danny's car and jumped inside, slamming the doors shut. I could still hear the laughter ringing in my ears as he started the engine and pulled away from the house, the glow of the lights fading into the distance. "What the hell was that?" Danny asked, shaking his head as if trying to wake himself from a bad dream. "I don't know, but I'm never going back there again," I replied, my heart still racing. As we drove away, I glanced back one last time, half expecting to see the masked man standing in the doorway, but the house stood dark and quiet. I let out a shaky breath, hoping that was the end of it, but deep down, I knew Halloween had changed forever for me. I could still feel the weight of those hollow eyes watching me, and the echoes of that laughter haunted me long after we left. There's something about Halloween night that makes you act in ways you wouldn't normally consider. Maybe it's the electric atmosphere, the sense that anything could unfold, or perhaps just the adrenaline that comes with the spooky vibe. Whatever it is, that night still lingers in my mind, and not for the reasons you might think. We had planned for it to be a fun adventure, just a few friends and I spending the night in an old, abandoned church. We'd heard all the rumors. Some claimed it was haunted, others suggested it was a hideout for squatters, or perhaps even something darker. But none of that deterred us. As teenagers, we felt invincible, or at least convinced that nothing terrible would actually happen. The church stood on the outskirts of town, wedged between a cornfield and a patch of woods that always seemed unnaturally quiet. During the day, the cornfields stretched endlessly, but at night, everything shifted. The darkness engulfed everything, transforming the woods and cornfield into something menacing. The church, with its crumbling walls and shattered windows, loomed like a forgotten monument to something long gone. It had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember, The windows were broken, the roof partially collapsed, yet the walls remained, standing like a skeleton of its former self. The stories surrounding the place varied widely. Some said it was cursed, others whispered about strange rituals conducted within its walls long after it had been deserted. The allure was irresistible for a group of bored teenagers like us. My usual companions, Jacob, Lisa, and Aaron, were all with me. We'd known each other since middle school and were always on the lookout for the next thrill. Jacob suggested the church after hearing some local kids discuss it at school. Lisa was hesitant. She'd always been more cautious, but didn't want to miss out. Aaron, on the other hand, was all in. He thrived on adrenaline and relished proving his fearlessness. So that's how we found ourselves driving out to the old church on Halloween night, equipped with sleeping bags, flashlights, and plenty of snacks to last us through the night. Our plan was simple: share ghost stories, maybe explore a bit, and see if we could catch a glimpse of anything paranormal. As we arrived, the place appeared even more dilapidated than I remembered. Overgrown grass and weeds surrounded the structure like a natural barrier, making it feel even more isolated. The front doors hung off their hinges, and vines crept up the sides, as if nature were trying to consume the entire building. The air was cold and still, the only sounds being our footsteps as we entered. The full moon bathed everything in a pale light, and an unsettling feeling crept over me, as if we were being watched. I dismissed it, convincing myself it was just nerves. After all, this was what we had come for: a scare, an adventure, a break from the monotony of small-town life. Jacob pushed open the doors, which creaked loudly as they swung inward. Inside, the church was just as expected: dusty, dark, and eerie. Pews were scattered about, some overturned, others rotting in place. The altar at the front was cracked and broken, but enough moonlight filtered through the shattered windows to give the room an unsettling glow. "This place is awesome," Aaron declared, grinning as he dropped his backpack onto one of the pews. Lisa, however, wasn't as enthusiastic. "I don't know, guys. This feels off," she admitted. "Oh, come on," Jacob said, rolling his eyes. "It's just a building. Nothing's going to happen." I stayed silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa might be right. Something about the place felt wrong, like we were intruding. I shrugged it off and followed the others as they set up their sleeping bags in the center of the main room. We formed a circle, using our flashlights to create pockets of light as we shared stories and laughed about how ridiculous some of the rumors were. Aaron was in full storyteller mode, trying to spook us with exaggerated tales of ghosts and demons. We laughed it off, but the atmosphere was beginning to affect us. The cold, the darkness, and the way every sound echoed through the empty building started to creep under our skin. It was about an hour in when everything changed. We heard it. Footsteps. They were faint at first, so soft that I thought I might have imagined them. But then they grew louder, closer, echoing through the halls of the church like someone was walking just out of sight. Lisa's eyes widened and she clutched her flashlight tighter. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Aaron smirked. "Probably just an animal. This place is old. There must be rats or something running around." But these weren't the quick scurrying sounds of rats. They were heavy footsteps, the kind made by something human. Jacob stood up, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "Anyone there?" There was no response. We exchanged uneasy glances, but no one wanted to admit that they were scared. After all, we were just here for fun, right? Nothing to fear. But then the footsteps started again, this time louder and more distinct, as if they were coming from the hallway leading to the back of the church. "I'm going to check it out," Aaron declared, standing up and grabbing his flashlight. "No way," Lisa protested. "Let's just stay here. It's probably nothing." "Yeah, probably," Aaron said with a grin, "but what if it's not?" Before any of us could stop him, Aaron walked toward the hallway. Jacob and I followed, more out of solidarity than anything else, while Lisa reluctantly trailed behind. The hallway was narrow and dark, with doors on either side leading to smaller rooms. The footsteps had ceased, but the silence was even worse. Every gust of wind through the broken windows seemed amplified in the stillness. We reached the end of the hallway, where a single door stood slightly ajar. Aaron pushed it open. and we stepped inside what appeared to be an old storage room. It was small, with shelves lining the walls and a few broken chairs scattered around. But the most striking feature was the door at the far end of the room, leading down to the basement. Jacob pointed his flashlight at it, and we all stared for a moment. "You're not seriously thinking about going down there, are you?" I asked. "Why not? We came here to explore, didn't we?" Aaron replied. I glanced at Lisa, who looked like she might bolt, but she didn't speak up. I didn't want to be the one to back out, so I reluctantly followed as Aaron pushed open the basement door. The stairs creaked beneath our weight as we descended, the scent of damp earth filling the air. It was colder down there, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. As we reached the bottom, we saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the basement. For a moment, none of us moved or spoke. We just stared, trying to comprehend what we were witnessing. It was tall, with broad shoulders, standing completely still and facing the wall. "Who's there?" Aaron called out, his voice louder than necessary. The figure remained unmoving, not even flinching. My heart raced, and I could feel the tension in the air as we awaited any reaction, but the figure just stood there in silence. "We should go," I said quietly. This time, Aaron didn't argue. We took a step back, slowly backing up toward the stairs while keeping our eyes on the figure. Just as we reached the bottom step, the figure turned. It didn't turn fully, just enough for us to see its face or lack thereof. Its face was featureless, smooth, and pale, as if it had been erased. That was enough for us. We bolted up the stairs, our footsteps echoing through the empty church as we sprinted toward the main room. I could hear Lisa breathing heavily behind me, and Aaron's flashlight beam bounced wildly as he raced ahead. We didn't stop until we were outside, gasping for breath in the frigid night air. "What the hell was that?" Jacob panted, doubling over with his hands on his knees. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we're not going back in there." None of us argued. We grabbed our things and fled, not stopping until we were back in the car. As we drove away, I glanced back at the church. The windows were dark, and the building looked as lifeless as ever, yet I felt like something was still watching us from the shadows. The ride home was mostly silent. There wasn't much to say. We had sought a thrill, a scare, and instead found something far worse. Something we couldn't comprehend. To this day, I still don't know what we encountered in that basement, but I do know one thing. I will never return to that church. If these Halloween tales gave you goosebumps, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling stories. Got a scary trick-or-treat experience of your own? Drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it, and remember this Halloween. Keep your eyes open. You never know what's lurking behind that mask. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.